generar un margen. Los acuerdos de recompra constituyen la categoría más importante de estas operaciones de financiación de valores en términos de volumen de negocio. Suelen estar motivados por la necesidad de tomar prestado dinero en efectivo y es una operativa en la cual se vende un valor a cambio de efectivo y se acuerda por adelantado la recompra. El préstamo de valores, el buy sell back, la segunda categoría en importancia, está impulsado principalmente por la demanda del mercado de valores específicos, es decir, el caso de las ventas en corto o para efectos de liquidación. Por lo tanto, es muy relevante esta actividad. Las operativas de financiación de valores permiten a los bancos y a los participantes acceder a financiación garantizada a corto plazo, creando así oportunidades de inversión y financiación de bajo riesgo. Por lo tanto, son centrales en la operativa de los mercados. También permiten la determinación de los precios y la liquidez del mercado secundario respecto a una serie de valores, facilitando la aplicación de estrategias de gestión de riesgos y de garantías reales. Al mismo tiempo, estas operaciones posibilitan el aumento del apalancamiento y la prociclicidad. Se considera que durante la crisis del 2008, la operativa de financiación de inversiones fue responsable de la transmisión de la liquidez que vimos en los mercados. Otro elemento central también vinculado con este tipo de operativa es la gestión del riesgo de crédito de la garantía. Como os estaba comentando, los mercados de operaciones juegan un papel fundamental en el actual sistema financiero. Si vemos un poco de cifras, podemos decir que el volumen de negocios del mercado de préstamos garantizados al 2015 era ya 10 veces más elevado que el de los préstamos no garantizados, en comparación con el 1,6 veces que era en 2008. Esto nos da una referencia de la magnitud del volumen de este mercado. En términos de volumen, las sumas pendientes de los mercados europeos de repos fueron de 5,6 millones de euros, lo que equivale al 13% de los activos totales de los bancos de la Unión Europea o al 25% de los bonos denominados en euros en acciones cotizadas. Los repos no solo ayudan a obtener financiación garantizada. Los inversores institucionales y las contrapartes no financieras aprovechan estos mercados para almacenar efectivo y obtener un interés. Además, los participantes buscan obtener valores que se pueden utilizar como garantía real para apoyar las operaciones financieras más allá de los préstamos de efectivo y préstamos. Las operaciones, como hemos dicho, de financiación de valores, llevan tiempo utilizándose como fuente de valores para llevar ventas en corto. Esta es la relevancia de este mercado. Los participantes en el mercado que acceden a este tipo de operaciones compran valores para obtener efectivo y cumplen sus requisitos en materia de márgenes igualmente. Incluso las contrapartes centrales pueden hacer uso de esos acuerdos de recompra para hacer a través de un repo inverso un beneficio y acumulando garantías en efectivo, lo que genera un nuevo mercado o una demanda adicional del lado del mercado de recompra. El regulador ya ha reconocido que la crisis de deuda soberana ha afectado el mercado de garantías. Debido al deterioro de la calidad crediticia de determinados bonos soberanos, se considera que la demanda por los productos de alta calidad no soberanos se ha disparado, generando una nueva necesidad de gestionar ese riesgo de crédito de estos valores que se utilizan para la operativa de día a día de las entidades. Además de que la reglamentación, las normativas que hemos vivido, empezando por EMIR y ahora SFTR, sabemos que son elementos que han impulsado este incremento de la actividad colateralizada. Se considera también que los requisitos implementados por Basilea, como son el ratio de apalancamiento, los ratios de liquidez, los ratios de estabilidad de liquidez, han afectado también lo que es la demanda por estos productos de garantía real más allá de los bonos soberanos. Esto genera un efecto de mayor demanda y genera lo que llamamos un efecto cliff en el mercado, que genera que todas estas garantías cada vez sean más relevantes en la actividad de las entidades financieras o de los participantes de los mercados de valores, y al mismo tiempo dependemos más de ellos para mantener la estabilidad. Esa es la razón por la cual se desarrolló la normativa SFTR. Security Financing Transaction Regulation lo que está buscando es dotar a este mercado importante de la transparencia necesaria para que los reguladores tengan la información necesaria a identificar dónde puede haber concentración de los riesgos y al mismo tiempo dotar a los participantes del mercado de señales más transparentes de concentraciones o de un deterioro de la calidad de estas garantías. El Comité de Estabilidad Financiera en el 2015, cuando dio a conocer la normativa SFTR, planteó que buscaría la transparencia de los mercados de valores basándose en una serie de principios. Estos principios son el mejorar la transparencia de los mercados de financiación a través de normas de presentación de la información, divulgación frecuente y detallada de la información, implementar normas para la reinversión de las garantías en efectivo, implementar principios de rehipotecamiento de los activos en los clientes y implementar normas de regulación para los valores y gestión de garantías reales. En lo que es transparencia de los mercados, las autoridades ahora están facultadas para recopilar información completa y oportuna sobre todas las exposiciones a las operaciones de financiación de valores entre entidades financieras, incluyendo la evolución de las garantías subyacentes. ¿Vale? Para conseguir esta información, ahora es necesario transmitir todos los detalles del operativo de operaciones de financiación, no solamente entre las dos contrapartidas, sino también de lo que hay detrás, lo que es la garantía real o el colateral. Lo que se llama reinversión de garantías. Se espera que las autoridades responsables locales de cada uno de los participantes del mercado implementen medidas para asegurar que la reinversión de las garantías estén limitadas y no se transmitan en riesgo de liquidez, ¿vale? Para esto, las normas contienen principios y medidas de alto nivel que abordan este riesgo, la transformación de vencimientos, así como el riesgo de concentración y de crédito. Hay medidas no solamente para las entidades financieras, sino también para los fondos de inversión, para las gestoras, para las entidades empresariales no financieras. Todas ellas tienen medidas específicas de información y de trabajo dentro de los mercados de valores, de operaciones de valores, de financiación de valores, de tal forma que va a desaparecer esa capa gris que está por encima de este tipo de operaciones. Recordar que nos pasaba lo mismo con la operativa EMIR, de los derivados OTC. Al final, una operativa OTC estaba acordada entre dos contrapartidas, en las cuales, una vez cerrada la operación y bajo los acuerdos que ellos tuvieran, pues había una serie de principios detrás que había que hacer frente y, sin embargo, no estaban informados y no se tenía un control total de las concentraciones, ¿vale? Este elemento de los derivados, si lo llevamos a las operaciones de financiación financiación de valores, se vuelve bastante más complejo. Es cierto que la operación es mucho más conocida y más trabajada, sin embargo, no estamos hablando aquí de derivados OTC, sino estamos hablando de todos los mercados de valores que son utilizados para esta tipología de financiación y de inversión, ¿vale? La normativa SFTR, que salió en 2015, busca la transparencia de ese tipo de operaciones y busca comprender los efectos de la intermediación del crédito no bancario, lo que se llama la banca paralela. Es decir, todas esas operaciones que no necesariamente están definidas, están realizadas entre entidades bancarias y por lo tanto cubiertas por la normativa de Basilea III, sino que juegan una serie de participantes adicionales en los cuales pueden conseguirse financiación o invertir sin que haya un respaldo global de transparencia para todos. En este aspecto, la normativa se marca tres elementos principales. La primera es la obligación de todas las contrapartes de notificarlas a los registros de operaciones centrales. A los fondos de inversión se les exige también que den a conocer a los inversores su recurso a estas operaciones en sus informes periódicos y documentos precontractuales. Es decir, toda la operativa repo de los fondos de inversión, de las gestoras, de las entidades de servicios de inversión, tienen que estar ahora registradas, previstas y informadas a los usuarios finales. Las condiciones de transparencia mínimas para la reutilización de la garantía recibida es uno de los retos de esta normativa, porque habrá que hacer, no solamente habrá que asegurarse que cuando se hace una operación de garantías, de financiación de garantías, la información del colateral es transparente para las dos partes, sino que esa información es transparente para cualquiera que vaya a utilizar esa garantía en operaciones posteriores. Es decir, en el caso en el que hiciéramos un repo a una semana y ese colateral esté en la posición de mi contrapartida, él puede hacer una reinversión de esta garantía. Y en ese caso debemos asegurarnos que a la hora de hacer esa garantía, el que primero tiene que informarme a mí que ha hecho esa transferencia y adicionalmente tiene que asegurarle a la otra persona con la que hace esa operación de que cumple totalmente con los tiempos para hacer frente a las dos operaciones, ¿vale? Es decir, hay un esfuerzo de integración de todas las operaciones sobre un mismo valor, ¿vale? Fechas. Ese es el tema que hace más relevante esta normativa. El 22 de marzo de 2019 fue presentado los RTS y los ITS, la información tanto regulatoria como de implementación tecnológica de esta normativa SFTR. A partir de esa fecha, 20 días después, empiezan a contar los calendarios de cumplimiento de la necesidad de ser transparente la operación de financiación de valores. Es decir, el 11 de abril de 2009 entra en vigor el artículo 4 que obliga a todos los participantes de estos mercados a hacer frente a su necesidad de reportar estas operaciones a los 3 repositorios. Las fechas clave que tenemos de ahora en adelante son el 13 de abril de 2020, en el cual tanto los bancos como las ESIs tendrán que informar de esta operativa a los 3 repositorios. El 13 de julio del 2020, las contrapartidas centrales y las depositarías centrales tendrán que hacer este ejercicio. El 12 de octubre le tocará a los fondos de pensiones, a las aseguradoras, reaseguradoras, fondos de inversión alternativa, fondos de inversión colectiva, de informar a estos 3 repositorios. Y el 11 de enero de 2021 le tocará a todas las entidades no financieras que no cualifiquen para poder delegarlo en sus contrapartidas, ¿vale? ¿Cuáles son las entidades no financieras que podrán librarse de esta operación? Pues aquellas que cumplan con al menos 2 de los requisitos marcados por el regulador. Es decir, tener un balance de menos de 20 millones de euros, una operativa de ventas de negocio de 40 millones de euros anuales o menos de 250. Si se superan 2 de esas, está obligado a hacer cumplimiento a su obligación de informar al 3 repositorio. ¿Vale? ¿Qué información tenemos que...? Primero, ¿quiénes son los que tienen que hacerlo? Como hemos dicho, son las entidades de crédito, las entidades de seguros, fondos de inversión, gestoras, instituciones de fondos de pensiones, las compañías no financieras que cualifiquen y las compañías centrales de depositaría y de contrapartida. Vale. Las reglas de quiénes son los que tienen que cumplir son muy sencillos. Si la contraparte no es financiera y cumple los requisitos que he mencionado anteriormente, entonces podrá delegarlo en la contraparte financiera. En el caso de las empresas de inversión colectiva, los responsables van a ser los gestores. Esta delegación de reporting es un elemento que es clave. Puede hacerse y puede cederse ese cumplimiento normativo. Sin embargo, como veremos posteriormente, eso no libra de que una entidad tenga que hacer esfuerzos internos de controlar esas posiciones. En términos geográficos, estamos hablando, al ser una normativa europea, de estarían afectadas todas las entidades europeas y sus filiales, las filiales europeas de entidades no europeas, las empresas financieras y no financieras que cumplieran con esta normativa, ¿vale? Ese es el scope de esta normativa. ¿Qué información es la que tienen que cumplir? Pues todas las transacciones de operaciones de financiación de valores concluidas, modificadas o terminadas después de la entrada en vigor. También hay un backlog de 180 días de toda la operativa que estuviera vigente en la fecha de entrada de la exigencia del 3 repositorio. Hay medidas de transición para todas estas, es decir, no podemos empezar a hacer el conteo desde la fecha de entrada en vigor de informar al 3 repositorio, sino tenemos que tener el ejercicio anterior de 180 días de operativa, de operaciones de financiación, que vamos a informar también al 3 repositorio en un ejercicio único de informar estas posiciones. las operativas con los bancos centrales están libres de hacer esta información. Se tiene que hacer a nivel operación. Tiene que informarse, y en este aspecto nos va a contar más Ron posteriormente, todos los eventos del ciclo de vida. En el caso del colateral, habría que incluir todos los ejercicios de reutilización o modificación de posiciones abiertas. Como hemos dicho, es posible la delegación y sería forzada en el caso de los non-financial counterparties pequeños, ¿vale? Sin embargo, si entramos a analizar uno a uno los campos que tenemos que hacer, nos encontraremos que el esfuerzo es amplio. Y no solamente porque estamos hablando de informar campos, 155 campos que habría que hacer por cada una de las operaciones, sino que tenemos que tener información de las contrapartidas, de la operativa o de la operación individual en la que estemos haciendo, ¿vale? Tenemos que hablar, en el caso de fondos de inversión, hablar de conceptos de concentración, qué tanta parte estamos utilizando en colaterales y qué tanto del total de activos que podemos usar en garantía. Hay que tener información de la transacción, no solamente en el individual, sino también a nivel agregado. De lo más complejo está la parte del uso de lo que es el colateral. Tener en cuenta que tendremos que cumplir con los requisitos de informar en tiempos de T+1, ¿vale? Toda esta información al trade depository. Es decir, nosotros hacemos una operativa al día de hoy, de operación de financiación o de inversión, ¿vale? Y tenemos T+1 para estar informando esta información al trade repository. Es decir, mañana a las 6 de la tarde tendría que estar informada esta información. El ejercicio que se tiene que hacer es complejo, sobre todo porque lo que tenemos que asegurarnos es que tenemos asegurado no solamente los términos de la operación, sino lo que hay detrás, el colateral. La información del leasing, del UT y del ley es algo que ya sabemos que nos va a dar problema por la experiencia que tuvimos con EMIR, porque nos vamos a encontrar en que tenemos que asegurarnos que los se casen con los de la contrapartida. Tenemos que asegurarnos en ese aspecto que estamos identificando exactamente quién del grupo financiero de nuestra contrapartida con quién estamos haciendo la operación, ¿vale? El UTI es un elemento que va a ser también relevante el informarlo, pero lo más complejo viene por la parte del colateral. Estamos hablando del mercado de valores, mercados de valores. Esto significa que estamos hablando de todos los productos que poseen garantía real para lo que es un repo. No son mercados homogéneos. Estamos refiriéndonos a mercados que son, no por muy utilizados, no tienen estándares generales totalmente aceptados. Por lo tanto, tenemos que hacer un ejercicio interno de conocer estas características, de tenerlas informadas de forma casi inmediata, de tal forma que podamos hacer este informe en cuestión de un día y que esta operación, una vez entrada al repository, tenga el proceso de casamiento con la contrapartida lo más rápido posible. Será de esperar inicialmente que nos encontremos con errores en este proceso, sobre todo porque al ser mercados no homogéneos, lo que nos vamos a encontrar es, por ejemplo, cuando estemos hablando de un bono de renta fija privada, pues puede ser que tengamos un sistema de gestión de volúmenes en decenas o en miles y la contrapartida la tenga en unidades. Eso va a hacer que haya un error en el casamiento de una celda y por lo tanto tendremos que revisarlo. Así como hay errores operativos tan simples como cómo estamos registrando la exposición en el instrumento o en el valor que usamos de garantía, hay cosas más complejas como cómo estamos calculando la renta de la operación, los tiempos en el cual esa garantía se cede detrás de esa operación de financiación deben de casar en las dos partes y debe de casar con cualquier otra tercera operación que utilice esa misma garantía para otra operativa, ¿vale? Entonces, en ese aspecto de reuso del colateral esperamos encontrarnos un ejercicio muy importante de unificación de información con tiempos bastante cortos, ¿vale? En lo que es la protección del colateral es otro elemento importante. O sea, tenemos que informar de quiénes son los custodios de las operaciones. Los custodios tienen que informar igualmente y tienen que cuadrar estas operaciones. Por lo tanto, hay un esfuerzo que no solamente se puede delegar en un tercero, sino que aunque un tercero haga la operativa, la entidad no se libra de tener que tener toda la información para responder a esos tiempos, salvo pena de hacer un incumplimiento y exponerse a un tipo de penalización por ello, ¿vale? ¿Dudas hasta aquí? Adicionalmente a estos tiempos de presentación, hay que tener, igual como teníamos en EMIR, 5 años de registros, ¿vale? Por lo tanto, tenemos que adaptar todas nuestras metodologías de back office, unificar todas las fuentes de datos para las operativas de valores, de tal forma que podamos entregar en un solo fichero estos 155 campos de cualquiera de las operaciones de financiación de valores que hagamos de la forma más rápida. Hay un esfuerzo significativo de trabajo de información para ello. ¿Sí?
En el caso de reportar, pone que estarían exentas de reportar las operaciones que se realicen con cualquier miembro del sistema europeo de bancos centrales.
Uh-huh.
¿Se incluyen las agencias? Agencias de Rico, por ejemplo.
No.
Estarían obligadas a...
Están obligadas, toda la operativa. Si solamente la operativa central con Banco Central.
Solamente Banco Central.
Una de las cosas que esperamos es los guidelines que ya se han puesto, el 27 de mayo, se han puesto a consulta y se espera que llegue en el último trimestre, que es parte de lo que esperamos que termine de aclarar. Uno de los elementos centrales está cuando se tenga actividad con una contrapartida fuera de la zona de influencia, es posible que tengan campos que no podamos casar, es posible que, que esa información no llegue en los tiempos necesarios y podríamos tener este elemento. Hay un ejercicio el día de hoy de intentar minimizar este tipo de situaciones, ¿vale? Las filiales de entidades que hagan entidades extranjeras que hagan operativa en Europa tendrían que ser capaces de informar toda la operativa y si el colateral es europeo igualmente tendría que informarse. Entonces hay ciertos eventos que todavía se considera que pueden generar problemas de tener toda la información necesaria para hacer este traslado de información al repository, pero es algo que todavía no está cerrado.
Si fuera una operación de financiación de valores, supongamos en Estados Unidos, con valores americanos, pero hay una oficina de un banco europeo.
Vale, en ese aspecto no estaría dentro de la normativa EMIR. La normativa SFTR está enfocada hacia el cumplimiento dentro de los mercados europeos. ¿Ah?
Sin embargo, si es un sujeto europeo con Estados Unidos, ellos tienen la obligación de reportar. Cuando hablamos de sucursales europeos fuera de Europa, tienen una obligación.
No, ni yo.
La parte grande tiene la obligación, sin embargo, la contrapartida con esta competencia fuera de Europa no tiene la obligación de
Sí, es todo fuera, exacto. Ron, you want to say something?
No, in the slides afterwards, I have a few things on non-EU.
Okay. Como os decía, los retos operacionales son complejos porque no son mercados homogéneos, no hay estándares generalizados de todos los campos que tenemos que informar. La reconciliación es un elemento que hará que no podamos delegar totalmente la responsabilidad de informar al repository, sino que cada participante de estos mercados tiene que hacer frente a su urgencia de tener toda la información disponible para, en caso de que hubiera un problema en la información al repository, poder responderla en los tiempos que marca el regulado, ¿vale? Esto es el ejercicio al cual nos estamos enfrentando de las operaciones de financiación de valores, ¿vale? ¿Qué debemos hacer? Lo más importante, y es el mensaje que queríamos tener en esta presentación, es debemos empezar a tener grupos de trabajo para identificar todas las fuentes de garantías que utilicemos en la operativa de mercados financieros. Deben de ponerse de acuerdo ¿qué es la información que trasladamos con nuestras contrapartidas? Asegurarnos que cumplamos con los 155 datos que tenemos que informar al repository. Empezar a homogeneizar toda la información que está dentro de estos campos. Y es un ejercicio que es bastante complejo, porque estamos hablando tanto de utilizar comas o puntos, estamos hablando también de si usamos decenas o millares comunidad, la terminología de cómo nombramos a cada uno de los campos o cada una de las contrapartidas, etc. Se recomienda que trabajemos con checklists que nos permitan completar estos informes antes de hacer el acceso hasta el repositorio. Es decir, entre más familiarizados estemos con la información que tengamos que dar, aunque deleguemos esto en un tercero, seremos capaces de hacer frente a las dudas que puedan venir por no casamiento de una operación de la forma más rápida. El proceso de reconciliación va a ser complejo, ¿vale? Va a ser complejo porque tiene que haber una operación de reconciliación entre las contrapartes y habitualmente puede pasar que estemos hablando de operativas que cada una de las contrapartes la haga con distintos repositorios y habrá un casamiento adicional de información. Por lo tanto, las posibilidades de errores iniciales es elevado. Al igual con el EMIR, esto es un proceso que llevará su tiempo de adaptación, ¿vale? Todos los que hemos vivido el proceso de cumplir con la normativa EMIR sabemos que el esfuerzo inicial fue grande, ¿vale? Pero al mismo tiempo, conforme hemos ido homogeneizando los procesos de reporting, pues los impactos de casamiento no son significativos, ¿vale? No obstante, el problema que tenemos con la normativa SFTR son los tiempos, ¿vale? Es decir, se le ha dejado en un segundo lugar y ahora tenemos marzo del 2020 como fecha en la que los principales jugadores de los mercados tendrán que hacer frente a esta normativa y adicionalmente estamos hablando de operaciones no homogéneas en el cual ni siquiera son manejados desde un mismo sitio dentro de las entidades. Tenemos distintas fuentes de información, Bloomberg, Reuters, Murex, etcétera, Calypso, todas ellas, si estamos trabajando distintas de ellas, tienen sus particularidades de la información que ahora tendremos que asegurarnos que es completa en cuestión de tema sub, ¿vale? Esto es en sí la complejidad de este reto. Para nosotros en Intermoney es algo que ya estábamos viendo, estamos trabajando a nivel interno y queremos hacerlo también a nivel externo con clientes, porque sabemos que aquí lo importante es la familiaridad con los mercados de valores, ¿vale? Entre más capacidad haya de homogeneizar, conociendo todos los mercados y todas las herramientas, pues más rápido va a ser este proceso. El objetivo de esta presentación era transmitir este mensaje a nuestros clientes, ¿vale? Y al mismo tiempo presentaros Capitec, que nosotros lo hemos seleccionado como nuestro socio para hacer frente a este reto de informar regulatoriamente, ¿vale? Pues eso es el mensaje que yo quería transmitiros. Os agradezco vuestra atención. Si tenéis alguna duda, pues adelante. Si no hay ninguna duda, dado que estamos en tiempo para la siguiente presentación, lo que hago es que doy paso a Ron Finberg, que va a hablar de un aspecto más técnico de solución al reto del reporting regulatorio y va a hablar sobre la solución que proponen.
thank you, Aurelio and Joaquin for coming and for inviting myself and our CEO, Ronan Curtis, to Madrid for the presentation. So very quickly, a little bit about Capitec. We are a financial technology company. First of all, just one thing. I don't speak Spanish, unfortunately, but if you do have questions, Aurelio will be happy to translate anything. So if you need anything, just ask away. So we're a financial technology company in Israel, and we focus on regulation. And our area of focus is on transaction reporting. So we cover, we really started in the business in MiFID I, and we've since added into our technology support also for EMIR, MiFID II, also out of the EU with Australian reporting, Singapore reporting, Canadian, and now we're currently implementing SFTR. One of the big projects that we're working on right now with SFTR, and that gives us a lot of our technical knowledge and really understanding of the regulation and working with data, is we were selected by IHS Markit to help them build their SFTR reporting platforms. IHS Markit is working with Pirum, and they're already doing a lot of work with securities lending, and we're building the technology underneath that we could take their trades that are on their platform in order to report it to the repositories. In addition to that, we also have our own technology that's separate, or our SFTR technology that's separate of working with the IHS Markit. Overall, we have about a billion trades a year that are going through our systems. Okay, so these are the topics I wanted to cover today. A lot of them Aurelio already covered, so we're not going to, I won't go over them again. As Aurelio mentioned, we're more on the data side and the technology, so I want to cover on two things. Well, I want to give a little bit of a overview on EMIR and MiFID II before we start talking about SFTR, just some background. One of the great things of working with about 100 different firms is we get to hear a lot of different information from the regulators that applies to banks, asset managers, brokers, and whenever we can, we'd like to kind of provide this feedback. So I'm going to start with that in the EMIR and MiFID, and then speak about SFTR. I want to go, in terms of SFTR, I want to kind of focus on less of the general, which Aurelio covered, and more on some specific details that we've encountered when dealing with different clients. And then at the end, we'll have a little bit about Brexit, however that's going to happen. Okay. But if you did come here for answers on Brexit, then you can just, I think you're better off just on the gambling parlors, and whoever has the best odds is the way to go for there. Okay, so first of all, before I start, who here has been involved with EMIR and MiFID in the past in your companies? You can raise your hands. Okay, quite a few of you. And what about SFTR? How many are going to be involved with SFTR? Okay. Who came here thinking they were going to a different presentation, not about regulation? Okay. All right. So let's start with EMIR. One of the big things in EMIR, a lot of people look at EMIR as like the older brother of SFTR. A lot of the fields are very similar to SFTR, just different products. So a lot of, therefore, the way how ESMA is viewing EMIR has been a template for SFTR. What does that mean? That ESMA put EMIR into the public in 2014. They told everybody, do this, do that. Everybody had lots of mistakes in doing it. ESMA took a few years to answer people how to fix these mistakes. And now they're using all this knowledge to help them do SFTR. So one of the big things that happened that ESMA did is after 4 years of EMIR being live, in 2018 they did a data review. They went through, they went through a whole bunch of different information, and then they went to the NCAs, Spanish regulators, Cyprus, UK, everybody, and they told them these are certain issues that we're finding lots of mistakes on your licensees in specific areas, and we'd like you to fix them. Why did they do this data review? So you'd think because it's been around for 4 years and it's important for them to review. That wasn't the reason. The reason why they actually did the data review was because of Brexit. What does Brexit have to do with anything? So there was a fear that if Brexit would happen, there would be a hard Brexit. Then if someone was reporting EMIR to DTCC, they might have to, through Europe, then they might go to Univista in London because, if DTCC didn't have a UK entity, then maybe they'd have to go to London. So they're worried about people moving from one trade repository to another, and they decided, let's look at all the data. Okay, so what are the findings that they found? So there are 3 main findings that the regulators found when they were reviewing all this data. So one was open positions. What does that mean? A lot of companies were reporting under EMIR, and this is something also applies to SFTR. They would open the position, but they never actually closed it. And those are familiar with reporting, there's something called new, and then there's a termination. So termination means if the product was closed before an expiry date, then you do a termination. If you have an expiry date, you don't need to terminate it because it automatically closes on the expiry date. However, a lot of companies were, not every derivative has an expiry date. You can have an open-ended rolling product, and those type of products were, for many companies, companies never closed them. So this is a thing where they went to the different companies and they found out that you have to look at your open position. So if you are a company reporting for EMIR, it is important to make sure that any positions that are being opened should be closed, and the regulators are kind of focusing on this. Another item was UTI breaks. So we know that there's a unique trading identifier which applies also to SFTR, and there was a lot of mismatch information where companies were reporting, they're saying, I'm trading with this bank, but this bank is not saying I'm trading with them. So they wanted to, ESMA and the local regulators are trying to figure out who is actually trading with who and why are the exposures between companies not being reported correctly. And this we believe is going to be an area of more focus as EMIR continues to be something. As ESMA focuses on EMIR, the breaks of UTIs of counterparties is going to be very important for an area that they want to cover. Another item is data breaks. This is less important, but this just means that I'm reporting a product. I say it's a notional value of 10 million euros, and my counterparty says 9 million euros. This happens, but it's less of the regulators will focus on that, but it's less of something that's important to them. So of the findings, I think really companies have to make sure that they're really closing their positions or just doing their positions correctly. A lot of firms are struggling with compression when they're compressing their EMIR trades to a end-of-day position, that sometimes that is not being compressed correctly. Okay, MiFID II. So I think when it comes to MiFID II, because there was a lot of data, there was both regulatory guidance and transaction reporting, the overall view among NCAs that we've spoken to has been that 2018 was just start reporting. We want you to be doing it just to make sure that all companies that have to report are reporting. And then 2019 has moved to where a lot of NCAs are starting to focus on the report quality. Why was 2018 the NCAs weren't as strict about it? Because they had their own problems. Even the FCA, who put a lot of money in there, considered one of the more prepared regulators for MiFID II. Throughout all of 2018, they had a lot of outages over there. Okay, so now that the NCAs are focusing on the actual data itself, where are the areas that they care about? Okay, so think about it this way: what's the area that's easiest for them to detect? So one of them is trade capacity mismatches, and this we're seeing quite often where a company is reporting, I might say I'm an AOTC, which is I'm transmitting orders, but I'm putting myself into the buyer-seller category. We've seen this amongst quite a few brokers that are doing match principal, and as well as asset managers that are incorrectly reporting their buyer-seller fields compared to their trading capacity. This is a very easy thing to fix. However, if you are doing it incorrectly, then you have to re-report everything, which is a problem. But I put it here in focus here as far as easy for the NCA to detect. Another, is this a question? Or? Okay. Another one on the bottom, the easy to detect is prices. In terms of like the pound dollar, a lot of like, pound stocks in the UK are priced in pence, but the report itself has to be in pounds, which means that if you have a stock trading at 750, it's not 750 pounds, it's 7.5 pounds. So if you have to do those conversions correctly, and also this is an area where the NCAs have found a lot of people doing mistakes over there. So if you are, this is an area that should be focused on. Another item is in terms of like the last one, in terms of I don't want to get too much about it, but the CONCAT for identifiers. Different countries, Spain, UK, everyone has a different way of having to do the personal identification, and we found that NCAs have contacted quite a few of our clients asking them why they're reporting certain countries and certain identifiers. So it's worth reviewing exactly to make sure you're following the Annex 2 tables of how to report identifiers. Okay. Any questions about EMIR and MiFID before we move on to SFTR? Good. Okay. All right, so since Rogelio covered a lot of this, I just want to say one thing in terms of why, what is SFTR? So why did it get created? The reason, after the global financial crisis in 2008 and 9, there was a drop of banks being able to provide lending to the market. So due to the drop of available liquidity, so companies started looking for alternative sources, and that's what created this whole idea of shadow banking that SFTR is trying to regulate. In terms of just a specific number to show how big it is, so from the end of 2008, the last one, 2008 to 2019, the ICMA survey of their members showed that they had a 67% increase of outstanding repos. So I don't know the specific numbers, which shows it's been a huge increase in non-traditional venues of gaining liquidity. Okay, so I'm going to skip this because we covered that before. Okay, in terms of the timeline, so the timeline we went over earlier, so I want to add just one thing to the timeline. So 2016, SFTR is already, although the reporting does not exist yet, SFTR as a regulation has been in force since 2015, which means that one part of it, the 2016, you have to have a disclosure of your collateral, and this is part that has been in force, and companies, their TTCAs have to be signed between them and their clients to be able to do this disclosure. Okay, where are we at right now in terms of SFTR? So we know April 11th is when it go live, but there's still things going on right now. So two important dates. So from May to July, ESMA had a few different public meetings, and they opened up the comments. And at the end of Q3 or beginning of Q4, the ESMA is going to be publishing their final consultation paper. Why do we care about the final consultation paper? Because the final consultation paper will have specific examples that the market has been asking for. During the past few months, a number of investment firms have had questions like, how do I report certain types of repos? What do I do in situations I was asked before about non-European counterparties? So the hope is that a lot of those questions that are really in the market right now that are a little ambiguous will be answered in their final consultation paper that will be out soon. Okay. So in terms of who has to report, as we said earlier, both counterparties, both non-financial and financial counterparties have to report. Obviously, the non-financial don't have to report until 2021. However, what about a non-European company? So if you're a EU company, you're an EU bank, and you have a branch in Singapore, and that branch in Singapore is trading repos, then because it's under the main branch, the headquarters in the EU, then those trades that are done in Singapore will have to be reported. However, if you're a Singapore bank and you only have a branch in Spain, then any trades that are done out of Spain would not have to be reported. So it's just quickly, just as you see here, you have an EU bank, and you have a US client. So the EU bank would have to report, the US client would not report. If you have a non-EU bank, let's say the Bank of China, and then they have a European branch, so they would have to report, and their counterparty, if they're a UK fund, if they're based in the EU, would also have to report. Are there questions about this? Okay. Following on that, one of the questions that's come up between the EU and the non-EU is what about funds and managers? Okay, so there's a few of the different associations have been pushing for clarification from ESMA, and one of the understanding is that a non-EU fund, so if you have a Cayman Islands or US or BVI or whatever, and if you have a non-EU fund, and it's being managed by a European asset manager, those trades would be out of scope. So what does that mean? That means that even let's say your Barclays, right? And Barclays has a UK office. And so all those Barclays, but they have Barclays funds are the actual, and they have the Barclays asset managers or that are in the EU. The funds that are outside of EU those trades don't have to report it. So currently, there's quite a few companies that are looking to move some of their funds out of Europe, the ones that where their clients are actually not putting their money into where the fund. It's not important for the fund to be in Europe, i.e., if the clients are in Dubai, as somebody deals with, or other parts of the world, then they're trying to move there may be a move of funds being domiciled outside of EU because of this out of scope. And so as I said, this is something that's been asked to ESMA, and there's a hope that there's going to be an answer on this at the end of the year. But both AFME and quite a few of the associations have been asked about this. Okay, let's go to excluded products. So all of SFTR came from these recommendations from the Financial Security Board, and the Financial Security Board says we want to look at how to regulate for risk. But what if something doesn't have risk? So a couple of the exclusions are for, I think the main one is to retail clients. So where does SFTR fall into to retail? So margin lending. So margin lending, like such as to recall something like CFDs. So if you have retail customers with CFDs or items like that, they're out of scope. Also, trades between EU companies and the central banks are out of scope. Those don't have to be included. And the last one is loans created for corporate restructuring. So if a company if a company creates loans in order to finance itself, its own ongoing business, those also don't have to report it. Okay, you covered most of this, right? Yeah. Okay. So because really cover this, I just want to add one thing here. ESMA themselves has published their validation rules. So you know, you can, just to show you what this is like. So if you are, you know, involved with SFTR, it's important to have all these different Excel files, and there's really a lot of information there that really goes over, depending on the field, where the products become reported or not. One of the last things that Rogelio talked about was in terms of aggregating your data and looking at it. So when you're preparing for SFTR, one area that's key to kind of look at is focusing on what type of products am I trading. Am I doing securities lending? Am I doing repos? And if let's say if you're doing repos, then using the validation rules, you can kind of focus on exactly which ones, what are the mandatory fields for repos. And, you know, if you have 153 different fields, don't worry about those other, you know, don't worry about 70 of them because they're not obligated to you. You really want to be able to focus on the fields that are applicable to your products. And using the validation rules is one quick way to be able to do that. So I just want to bring it up. It's public. Everybody could download it. All right, so we can pose. In general, just the last point on this slide is, even though there's 153 fields, typically most reports will only have between 40 to 55 fields actually included in the report. So don't look at 153 as this big number. It's a lot less depending on what you're trading. That's why it's really important to focus on understanding your product well. This is from the life cycles. There's a little bit of a confusion on what's considered what has to be reported, where things. So what ESMA's done, and this is also a very important table, is they've showed, depending on the different product here, the different type of SFT, what are the potential life cycles that are applicable to it. I don't want to repeat too much. One item I do want to mention is in terms of modifications and corrections. Some people get a little confused about this sometimes. So there's you know, when you do a new repo, so you do a newt, and now if there's a change in it, if there's a change in the market value of the repo, then you do something called a modification. So modification is just a change in the trade. And that could be done for repos, for security lending, just if there's a market value change, if there's the securities are being changed that are backing the repo or the securities lending. So that all has to do with a modification. Not to be confused with a correction, where a correction was when there was actual error. You know, I said my counterparty was A and it's actually B. That's when you do a correction. So it's important to understand that. Also, another area that's important to kind of understand is in terms of collateral. There's a collateral, see over here all the way on the right there, there's the collateral field. So that you could do a collateral update. If the collateral update is only supposed to be used for changes in the type of collateral, instead of using the modification field. This also ESMA put out quite a few different, just wanted as a resource. They've really mapped this out very well, showing which possible life cycles apply to each product. So it's really kind of worth looking here to see what's applicable to you. Okay, so next one, talking about just UTI matching. So as mentioned, SFTR is similar to EMIR, and one of the big similarities is that EMIR is double-sided reporting, so you have both counterparties have to report the same trade, which is really annoying, because what that leads to is both the information on both sides has to be the correct. EMIR, a lot of the focus is just being on UTIs, meaning making sure both sides are actually reporting the same UTI, the trade reference, and currently I think only about 35% of trades are being matched correctly. Due to the experience with EMIR, ESMA has told, in their conferences, has told people that we want to be more focused on having UTIs being reported correctly from the beginning. And what this means is that a lot of the prime brokers who were not prepared for EMIR and they do not have a good way of telling the UTIs to their clients, the vast majority of the major, actually I think all of the major prime brokers have already have told clients that they're going to be working on a specific type of UTI logic that people could be able to use in order to create UTIs. So UTIs is expected to be less of a problem in terms of SFTR because the prime brokers who are responsible for originating the UTIs are already taking a more progressive stance on how to distribute it. However, if you are a buy-side company, and a few weeks ago I spoke to quite a few of the large asset managers, and they have all said that they don't know how the SFTs how the UTIs are going to be provided by the prime brokers. They've only been told that they will be receiving them, but there has been little feedback. So this could be something that if you're a buy-side firm, you may not know how you're getting your UTIs from your prime broker until, you know, as late as March. So, you know, if you are on the buy side, just keep pushing your prime brokers for this information. Okay, but it's more than just UTIs. So UTIs is like, as we said, is like an EMIR problem. Now we have new problems for SFTR. A few of the items that have been brought up that could lead to breaks are, one is in your collateral you have to be, for debt you have to put an investment grade. Most companies are going to be using they're going to be using third parties such as S&P or Moody's to provide their credit ratings. But what happens if you have, you know, S&P is giving you a B plus and Moody's is giving a B on it, so it goes from investment grade to medium grade? That could be a break. So that's also worth. I don't believe it's going to be that big of a deal, but it's something that it is a break that will exist in the market. So it's worth keeping in mind. Also, CFI codes. ESMA is going to be, the understanding is ESMA is going to be doing very stringent validations on CFI codes. And if you are, some companies right now, for when they're reporting CFI codes, are only doing like the first two letters and just putting XXX to everything else, as opposed to like on the, here you have the DBX, TFX. So this is something very technical that companies have to figure out. How do we want to prepare our CFI codes? Do we want to just use the easier moniker and do like just the first two letters? If you are taking that stance, then you will have breaks with your counterparties. There's no way that will not happen. Timestamps is another area of concern that's been come up. With a repo, you have an hour. The validations from ESMA are going to allow for an hour between the execution timestamps. However, there's other items, such as like one for margin lending. You know, if I sign a margin lending deal today, but I don't actually take the money out for another week, when is the trade date? Is it today or is it next week? So there's going to be questions about that companies have to understand how they're reporting these things with their between them and their counterparties. Last is collateral data. So the reuse information is something that there's quite a few different fields when it comes to the updates in collateral, where your counterparties don't know your collateral data. Everybody has to do that themselves. I want to get to this in a second. So here, in terms of collateral data, like if I'm a buy-side company and I have a reuse I have reuse agreements with 5 different banks, so I know my own reuse, my own data, my own collateral information. However, my prime broker doesn't know what I'm doing for collateral. So how can my prime broker be able to report for me? So they can't do that. So we'll get back to this in a second, but collateral is an issue, is going to be a problem for delegated reporting. Any questions? All right. Okay, so LEIs and ISINs. ISINs was a big problem for MiFID II, having the right one. Now, when we look at LEIs, so what do we think of LEIs? We think of the counterparty LEI, what the company that they had. SFTR is going to be even going beyond just the counterparty LEIs and the clearing party LEIs. They have something something new that they've initiated, and they have a new thing called the LEI of the issuer. So if I am the example that people are always talking about is like a Mitsubishi, bank in Japan. I have an ISIN for my stock. However, Mitsubishi themselves may not have actually created their own LEI. So you have a problem where you have to have an LEI, you have an ISIN of the product and an LEI of the issuing company of that ISIN. And a lot of those ISINs are not in the market. So sorry, a lot of those LEIs are not in the market. So if you have stocks where the underlying company doesn't have an LEI, very prevalent with Japanese and Australian firms, then how do you report it? So there's two. ESMA hasn't given any answers. The feeling is that they're going to make just like they at the end of like it was December of 2017 when they gave a 6-month leniency for LEIs for MiFID II. Expectation is that they're going to do two things. Either they're going to make their LEI validations for the issuer a lot easier, or they're just going to have something called a dummy LEI, meaning if you have a stock that doesn't have, the ISIN doesn't have a issuing LEI, then over there you can just find, they'll take like a A, B, C, D, E, F type of LEI for that. Okay, just in general, just quickly, the fields that do require ISINs. So you have the product identifier and the underlying identifier, which are similar to MiFID II. Security identifier, which is something new for security loans. You have also identifiers, the collateral will have identifiers, and then you have a collateral basket identifier. So if usually it's more for ETFs. Okay. So that's more or less kind of like a review on some of the specifics about data where we're finding there are some technical issues in how to get that data and where people are having problems right now. Okay, let's move on to trade repositories. So SFTR has to go to one of these, has to be sent to a trade repository. So the three of them that are proposed right now are expected to be receiving for Regis TR, DTCC, and Univista. Currently, Capitec is we're working with IHS Markit in the early stage integration with DTCC. The trade repositories have opened up their initial UAT testing stages. It's not open for everybody. We happen to be in one of them for DTCC, so it gives a little bit of some feedback on the early reports that we're sending. Costs, how much does it cost? So there's no, as of a month ago when I was preparing my notes, we didn't have any specific published cost. There's expected to be similar to EMIR and MiFID, where there's going to be tiered pricing, and that should be between 5,000 to 15,000. There'll be initial pricing that starts like on a yearly contract. It will start at between 5,000 to 15,000 pounds. Another item that I forgot to mention before is that unlike other reports which can be sent in a CSV, so SFTR, the report itself has to be in a XML file format. And the repositories are providing a service where you can do if you're sending them in CSV, they will also provide the service of converting it to XML, and there's a different charge for that. It happens to be, just so you know, that Capitec does the CSV to XML conversion as part of our basic service. So you get that included for free. Okay. Next, I want to talk about important associations. How many of you are familiar or involved or members of any of these associations, or ICMA, ISLA, AFME, ISTA, or EMA? Anyone? Okay. Which one? ICMA. Okay. All right, so why do I bring these up? So ICMA has really become, the top four, ICMA, ISLA, AFME, and ISDA, they call themselves the Power Four for SFTR. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing that you want to know, but their two things they're doing. A, they have direct relationships with ESMA in terms of mentioning certain issues that they have with their clients to get messages back from them on how to do certain reports. Also, they're working on building consensus. So, for example, like in terms of securities lending, questions about timestamps. So a lot of those answers are like how the industry is going to decide how to do timestamps. It's going to come from the consensuses that these associations bring. So ICMA, they're really focused on repos. ISLA's security lending. AFME is really among the prime brokers. ISTA is, they do a little bit of everything on derivatives. And AMA is also a company that Capitic works with. We're members there. It's a buy-side firm. And if you're a buy-side firm, they're really doing a lot of, they're speaking with all four of these associations to get answers for their members. If you're not a member of them, it's really, find someone who is, because there's a lot of data that they're providing that really will help you on being able to do your report. Just want to show you an example over here. Two things. So this is from AFME. They've, and this is from a while ago, so for their prime broker members, they've created, they've done their own mapping of, a very specific definitions of all the different fields where they have problems, feedback that they've gotten from ESMA, et cetera. And these are things that are available to their clients, to their members. Also, ICMA has done the same thing with repos. They have a similar type of field here where they've mapped out 22 different repo and buy-sell back trades. So if you're in the buy-sell back or repos, you'll probably fall under one of those 22 examples. They have both all the different scenarios can happen about different products, whether it's centrally cleared, not cleared, bilateral, with a tripartite, all the different examples that they have. So I would, if you mentioned ICMA, it's here, so it is, if you are in the repo market, it's worth being involved with them. The reason I'm mentioning it is because a lot of people don't know that this information is out there, and it's, if once you see it, you're like, well, how did I live without this? So if you can be part of those associations, it's worth doing. Okay, delegated reporting. Of those that were involved with EMIR, how many are involved or are reporting through like having their counterparties do delegated reporting for them? Okay. So similarly to EMIR, SFTR is also going to is allowed to do delegated reporting. Now, what's the advantage of delegated reporting? The advantage is if I'm a buy-side firm and I have 5 different banks, okay? That means I have 5 different counterparties. So to me, to do that report would mean that I would have to have some sort of, I'd have to get 5 different files from my counterparties and have some sort of logic for all the different UTIs in order that they're matching. So that's very difficult to do. So a lot of the banks, what they've decided is we'll do the delegated reporting for you. So we'll report for you, send it to your trade repository file. In terms of SFTR, it's also being provided, but there's a few different challenging things to consider. So if you're on the sell side, you have to grade who's creating the UTI and how is it being distributed. Okay. Secondly is how do you reconcile versus my counterparties? Even if I'm a buy-side firm and my bank is reporting for me, how do I know that my bank is doing it correctly? You can look into your file and look at it, but you don't necessarily have the knowledge to be doing it. So it's really worth speaking to your bank to understand how they're doing the reports. So that's one area. And there's quite a few companies, quite a few asset managers who have made a decision to stop using delegated reporting in the past year because they don't trust the way that their banks have been reporting for them. Specifically in the Central Bank of Ireland has spoken to quite a few of its funds because there's a lot of funds being domiciled in Ireland, and they were told them that your bank is doing it incorrectly. So there's been a move, we're seeing it right now from Irish funds where they're looking to do their reporting in-house. Next, collateral data, right? So if I'm a sell-side company, how do I report the collateral data for my buy-side companies? I can't. It's just, there's too, if they're working for multiple companies, I can't do that. So there are some items there are some gaps there in terms of delegated reporting. Two specifically, so if you have the sell side, we said that you have to, you know, what type of controls you have in place in order actually that should be buy side on there. If you're a buy side, what type of controls do I have in place to see what's being reported? And then for the sell side, the question the bottom there is, what are the benefits? Do I really want to be doing delegated reporting for my clients? And I think this is something very important for companies to understand. Like, what's the benefits of me doing delegated reporting? So as again, this should be sell side here, should be buy side, and buy side this. A little mistake there. Due to some of the complications that are involved with delegated reporting with SFTR, so one of the things that's being proposed in the market is something called assisted reporting. So how does assisted reporting work? Instead of the bank deciding I'm going to report on behalf of my clients, what they'll do is they'll just create a report that is, will have all the common data and the transaction data itself, because they basically take their report, do the flip of it, they send it to the client. The client then makes a separate file that has all their collateral data, and then that has been sent to the trade repository. So this kind of makes it, this is what we view could be a good solution in the market, where what the prime brokers are basically saying is, here, we're going to give you as much, the trade that we're reporting, we're going to give you that information, that file, and now that you're holding that file, you can review it, make sure it's being done correctly, add the missing collateral fields that you need, and then report it to the trade repository yourself. This is one item that there's been getting a little traction among the AFME members of the prime brokers about. Okay, anything else about SFTR?
What are the consequences of not reporting correctly or not reporting at all? I mean, has anything been said on that area?
It's, okay, so nothing's been, there's, they put in figures for the fines. I don't know them offhand. I can, they're in the, okay, so for, right, so, yeah. Yeah, the BAML is a good example. They were the only one company that's gotten like a major EMIR fine. The trade repositories have gotten smaller ones. They got it, as I said, in the tens of millions. And specifically, they had a problem with how they were reporting ETDs, and for and doing the delegated reporting for their counterparties. So it is something that's back to this in terms of as a sell-side company, what's the risk of doing it incorrectly? So if you're, I think most companies are able to figure out how they're going to do their own reporting, but do you really want to take the risk of reporting on behalf of your clients? And if you do that incorrectly, and that's an area where the regulators have shown that they've kind of been looking at. So the existing fine in EMIR has been on that issue. So what type of fines will come up in the future? No one knows. As strange as it is, ESMA has actually been more focused on MiFID I fines because, pretty much I think every major bank has had a MiFID I fine. A few months ago, Goldman Sachs and I think UBS were fined 10, 20 million. I think they just see there's money to fine them for they did, in the past, and so they'll eventually get to these areas, but.
I'll add just to add one thing. I have one detail here about fines. Merrill Lynch got a fine of £25 million for under reporting ETDs.
Okay, any more about SFTR before we go to Brexit? Okay. All right, as I said, when we first started, who knows what's going to happen to Brexit? Everybody's looking for this, the Goldilocks approach. So there will be Brexit, but there will be a deal, and then the passporting is there, and then the same reporting is the same, and nothing has to change. Okay, that's what everybody's hoping for. I'll tell you what we do know. What we do know is that the FCA has already said they're going to have their version of SFTR, EMIR, and MIFIR, following the same ESMA formats. So if your company has both a UK and a Spanish or EU entity, you'll be able to, if you're reporting now with just in Spain, and then for your UK entity, you have to start reporting for them only in the UK. The formats will be very similar, if not the same, and the trade repositories and ARMs have said that at least in the beginning, any small changes that they will handle on their side. So in terms of just actually taking the CSV that you're currently creating for EMIR and MIFIR, you'll just have to send it to a different place. You'll have a UK destination and an EU destination, but you don't have to worry too much about the actual format. But there's no way of knowing that it's going to not change in the future. And the expectation is that the FCA has had specific areas of focus when it comes to MiFID II and in market abuse regulation, and fields that they believe are more important, they'll probably be adding that to their reporting requirements. Okay, so little like housekeeping notes over here. So if you are a EU company, you can only report to an EU trade repository or an ARM. You can't send it to a UK one. But that's not such a big issue because all the ARMs and trade repositories have already been created, both EU and UK entities. One area that we do anticipate being a huge mess is with the FIRDS list. So what's the FIRDS list? This is the list of the different ISINs that are considered the EU ISINs that are considered in scope for reporting. If and when the UK leaves, there's going to be separate lists there's going to be the EU list and the MiFID list, and a lot of the ISINs that you're used to reporting now because they're considered in scope, because they're UK products in scope under the EU, they're suddenly going to be removed. And so you'll probably have, this will cause a lot of different rejections and issues in the market. My belief, but this is just my opinion on this. Don't take it just take it as opinion. I think the NCAs are going to struggle with this more than the companies or the ARMs, because they have their existing databases that they're going to have to update, and I'm wondering if their validation rules are going to be updated in time to be able to handle this issue. So the FIRDS list is something that the separate EU and UK FIRDS list is something that will be a problem. It's going to be a real pain, and we don't even talk about it that much because we don't want people to start preparing for something that might not be a problem for a while. Okay, last. This is something that's really applicable for both Brexit or non-Brexit. I'll just give you one example. There's a company called Interactive Brokers. It's a U.S. equity broker. Is everybody familiar with them? Interactive Brokers. So Interactive Brokers, they're huge in the U.S. and they have a small little entity in the U.K. for onboarding clients. As a U.K. company, it means that they fall under, they have to have compliance people, all the different market abuse. So they were recently fined by the FCA by $1.5 million. Why? Because because they didn't have market abuse controls that were being done in the UK. It was all being done in the US. And what they said to the UK people is the UK office is they said, listen, it's all being done in the US. You're allowed to do that all in the US, but you at least have to be able to have some sort of control and oversight on what's being done on your own things. So this is one. So that's why I put over here. You can't have compliance reviewed only in one jurisdiction. It's going to be that you have to have the controls in place to review compliance in EU and the UK. But you could have one hub for handling compliance. one Spanish bank that I spoke to, in the past year, they explained to me, like, although they have EU, UK, Asian, all of their compliance is actually being handled out of Madrid, but, which is permitted, but the local offices also have to have access to that, be able to understand what's being done. The Singapore office for that Spanish bank needs to know what's being reported there as well, report on their behalf. So you have to have that oversight. Okay. So I think really covered a little bit of this in terms of the data appropriation. So I'm just going to cover a few little items here. Is delegated or self-reporting. Really, you should be answering that how you want to do. If you're a sell-side company, how you want to, whether you're going to be answering that, providing that, and how you're going to be doing that. The last part over here, what systems are available to simplify my report delegation? As mentioned before, there's quite a few third-party solutions that are in the market, and some of them are doing for collateral management, enriching data fields such as ISINs and credit ratings. If you have access to those systems, they'll definitely be able to help with your enrichment of your report data. Also, there's the tri-party systems such as Purim and Equiland are also doing quite a lot of work on helping their users being able to get a lot of information that they need for doing the report. So if there's already a place there's a system in place that has a lot of your whether it's security lending or your repo data there, then take advantage of that. One other item here, just in terms of valuation updates. Valuation updates is something we know is a problem for EMIR. It doesn't exist for MiFID. It will exist for SFTR, and we've gotten a lot of feedback, specifically in terms of securities lending, how people are going to deal with baskets in terms of valuation updates. So either you have to use more external market data or have some sort of reconciliation system from your existing, P&L system. So valuation updates is an area to look at. Usually what we typically advise companies when they're kind of creating their program is you really have to have all of your decision makers involved when you're preparing for SFTR. That will be, you have your compliance and legal people that can kind of give the opinions of what needs to be reported, what the fields are, and you also have to involve your operations and IT people. Or and your consultants and the tech providers. Okay, just we're gonna do a little the platform afterwards or no?
Yeah, the idea is to have a break, coffee break, and then go to the platform that you.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay. So, do you have any question up to here? If not,
okay. If you have any specific questions, as showed, I've been able to get some access to the AFME and these different templates. If you have specific questions about your products, feel free to speak to me or email us, and I'll try to get any answers to that.
Perfect. Entonces pasamos a un coffee break, donde nos gustaría pasar a saludarlos a vosotros. Nos vemos ahora entonces afuera.
Y tomamos un café y luego terminamos de ver la plataforma.
Sí, posteriormente, media hora, entramos a ver la plataforma.